Ed, welcome. You and your team have been doing some spectacular work, by the way. I've used you as a reference point as far as battleground states and some of the policies, so good work there. Listen, I understand the polls were spectacularly incorrect in many instances back in 2016, maybe 6 to 8%, which is why many people believe the president may have been a lot or may still be a lot closer in some key battleground states like Wisconsin. But now we've seen some of these polls widen in some cases to double digits. I think 14% lead by some nationally over the weekend in some flash polling. Do you agree with that? Has this extended that gap and thus makes the chance of a close and potentially contested election go down?
You know, Brian, 4 years ago, we had not yet had the Access Hollywood tape. We had not yet had the Comey letter. Last week was quite the year. And, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the last kind of couple weeks of this election. And so when I talk to investors here at Raymond James, people are still not willing to count President Trump's reelection chances out. But the way I think about it, when I try to take a step back, I look at each event and say, if we are correct from the polling data in assuming that President Trump is down in his reelection bid right now, does this event add or subtract from potential voters going to his camp? Does it add or subtract from his base turning out? And I do think it's kind of hard to come up with a scenario where some of the events of the last week would add to the number of voters he's had. And so that has been starting to show up a little bit more in the polling data. And so kind of as different kind of October surprises continue to play out, I want to always ask that question, is this adding to his support? And if you can't come up with a yes, or you say this is a neutral, that's a positive for Joe Biden at this point.
Yeah, because again, not my opinion, Ed. You read everything you read from your team and others suggest this is not Trump versus Biden in the debate. It was each guy versus themselves in a way. I mean, pretty much if you can't make up your mind between the two, I'm not sure what I've got for anybody. It's whether people show up and support. It's not as much as who do I pick, it's do I actually want to go out and vote for this candidate in general? Do you believe this not necessarily the diagnosis, Ed, but you know what I mean, sort of all the drama surrounding this reduces the chance of that sort of middle of the road Trump voter saying, you know what, I just can't bring myself to go to the polls?
You know, I think it's a real question. I think the biggest uncertainty we have going into November 3rd is understanding turnout. And that, you know, is kind of one of the ways in which polls can be wrong. What we have seen in the last kind of two elections in 2018 and 2016 was an underrepresentation of some of the voters that ultimately supported President Trump in Republican candidates. What we're seeing now with mail-in voting is a lot of new voters. When we look at the data, which is basically the only state we have good data on in North Carolina, 20% of the voters who have returned ballots didn't vote in 2016. Right now, that's disproportionately based upon the information we can gather in favor of Democrats. What's also interesting is how little of the undecided voter is at this point. We had a lot, you know, probably close to 10% of the electorate undecided 4 years ago. In polling data right now, it's in that 2 to 4% range. So one of the things that we have seen consistently is this has been a relatively stable race, despite some incredible headlines that have impacted that, which tells me that most voters have largely made up their mind. They either support President Trump or they don't.
Yeah, I mean, and people are locked in to their candidate one way or the other. I mean, listen, Ed, I don't know about you. I woke up on Saturday morning. You know, you open up social media. Half of social media says Trump's a super spreader. The other half says he's faking the whole thing because and I just wanted to crawl back and cry myself back to sleep. But that's a different issue, Ed. I mean, listen, the reality is this. You look at Boris Johnson in the UK, you know, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. The president has a very, very good chance of recovering and coming through this. We all know that. Plus, he's getting top-notch medical treatment as well. We still have a few weeks. Is there this idea then of a potential recovery bump, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, so we've looked at other countries and where there has been a head of state, a leader with COVID-19. There has been a bit of a kind of rally around the flag, kind of boost in their popularity. But as you mentioned, we are a very divided country. And I think you have to look to see kind of the questions that have come up over the weekend related to what exactly is his condition? When did we learn about it versus when did he learn about it? What is the impact of the car ride that he did last night? Are the decisions that he is making now making it more likely that voters go into his camp, or is it going to yet again bring up questions of his COVID response, bring up questions of whether or not this is something that voters want to spend 4 more years with? The American people are going to have to decide that, but that's where I keep on going back to kind of, does each individual action add or subtract or keep the same number of voters for either side? And it's been hard for me to see some of these events of the last week and have a strong argument that it's adding to his vote support at this point.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.